Alyson, what would you say are some of the common misconceptions that parents make around the whole idea of sibling rivalry?
Oh, there's so many misconceptions. I think probably one of the biggest corrections that I have to make in parents' thinking is that parents have the belief that kids are incapable of getting along and that they need a parental intervention when there's conflict. So parents somehow feel it's good parenting to step in when their kids are fighting. And actually, the way in which we step in and how frequently we step in and most of the things that we do when our kids are in conflict as parents actually stimulates more conflict in the kids. That traditionally, what we would do in the time of conflict inadvertently is we would act as either the police officer or the judge, and we're somehow collecting information about the transgression and deciding who's innocent and who's guilty. So who's the aggressor and who's the victim? And then we lay down some kind of sentencing for the person who we deem to be the aggressor and punish them in some way. Unfortunately, when we really look at human dynamics, children co-create conflict, and it's very hard for parents to see because we tend to see things through our own lens. So, if you were the child who had the brother who picked on you in your childhood, chances are you're going to only see it through the perspective of the little victim. Or if you were the older sibling in your family and you always had this bratty younger kid, you're probably going to side with them. So there's no real objective reality there. So you're going to inadvertently show favoritism. So we're better to let our kids manage on their own. And that's very hard for parents to do.
Yes, it's exceptionally hard. I mean, you're talking about not taking sides. You're talking about paying sort of a deaf ear to the screaming and squabbling and whatever. Sometimes it gets physical. So what should we be doing as parents to try to cope with that?
So what we need parents to understand is the theory behind this, which is it's about identifying what your role and responsibility is as a parent and what the roles and responsibilities of the children are. They are the caretakers of their own relationship. You can't farm that out to somebody else. They have to decide if they want to get along. They have to decide if they want to have conflict. That is between the two of them. So they will look to us to say, make him give me a turn, or make him stop jumping on my bed, or make him not push me. And they look to us, and of course, as parents, we think, oh, well, I have to be the disciplinarian. If I don't do something, I'm being permissive. But the truth is what you're doing is you're triangulating, and this never works in human relationships. So we have to continue to say, I'm sorry you're having trouble with your brother. I'm sure the two of you can work it out. I can see it doesn't look like he's treating you very nicely. I trust you can speak up to him and work it out. So once they realize that you're not going to take the bait and get pulled in, lo and behold, don't kids get creative and realize, I guess I shouldn't be, provoking my brother, because when he punches me, my mother is not impressed with how bad he is and doesn't yell at him. She does not think suddenly, oh, I'm a good little boy that has to suffer the injustices of my brother, and suddenly I'm not her preferred one. So I guess without all those benefits, maybe I should actually treat him like a decent fellow, and then they actually get on with liking one another when we stay out of it. So the idea here is for parents to not feel that they are somehow permissive or not doing their duty when they step away. Now, having said that, and I think this is a really fair point, two mistakes parents make. They will either wait for it to escalate to the point where they can't stand watching it, and in that case, what I would say is, if you only step in when things get very violent, you've just trained your kids to get very violent in order to engage you. So you'll have made matters worse. If you feel you need to step in, the trick is what you do to one, you do to both. So if they are fighting in a way that you can't tolerate, whatever your level is, you say, you know what, this is not okay, not in this house, I can't bear to watch this. You both need to be separated for 5 minutes. So it's not just the one person throwing the punches or the one person stealing the property or jumping on the bed has a disciplinary action. They both do. So two do the crime, two do the time. Okay, so we get away from thinking about people's roles as being victim and bully, and instead we say you're co-collaborators conspiring to make conflict. You both have to suffer the same consequence. So I would just separate them. You know, you need 5 minutes apart if you can't get along. You can't keep the TV on without fighting about the program. The TV goes off until you decide how you're going to share it. Oh, people are fighting over computers. Goodbye, computer. When you guys have a plan for how to share it without fighting, you come get me, and the computer can go back on. So in this way, both kids suffer the same consequence.
Would you say that, you know, especially in the time we live in today, more and more parents feel the need to intervene in these types of situations versus,
yes,
you know, when we were growing up? And when we were growing up, what you just described that we should be doing was being done. But now with the, you know, the helicopter parenting, people feel like they have to dive in and save everybody and save the situation, and it's a harder lesson to teach.
Yeah, my girlfriend, she said her father's policy was the first person to come upstairs and complain is the one who gets grounded.
I've heard
you
that.
know, I mean, parents didn't bother themselves with this stuff. And if you think about it, if you really go back in history, you know, it used to be considered one of the highest ideals to talk about the brotherhood, and there could be no stronger relationship than, you know, a brother who has his brother's back, and you know, and that's because they were left to their own devices. When we take parents out of the picture, we level the power playing field. Kids are no longer vying for favoritism, and they get on with getting along with one another. So in recent years, as we've gotten this idea that parents have to play a more active role, and that we're so worried about psychological fragility, that we're always thinking like, oh no, there must be complete peace and harmony. They must always get along. And at the first sign of conflict, parents' notion of the fragile nature of a child's body and psyche, they get over involved. And so we would be much better to have that older, robust, I trust you to manage, I trust you to deal with each other. I'm sorry, I don't have time for your problems. I have to like bring in the crops, and you know, we didn't lay down our life for our kids in the old days. We'd be much better to go more towards that direction again, for sure.
Well, and you know, and it's interesting when you talk about psychological fragility, something that we don't consider when we are busy diving into safe situations is that we are making our children more psychologically fragile as a result of that action.
That's correct, because your siblings teach you about conflict and conflict resolution. Your siblings are the ones that teach you, like, how red are the tips of his ear going to get before he bites me, you know? How am I going to learn to share this toy? Because we're not allowed to come out of our rooms until we have a plan, so I better figure this out with my brother. Mm-hmm. And so then when you learn to cooperate and you learn to share, you learn to take turns, and you get the benefit that, you know, my sibling isn't going away, so it's going to be in my best interest to get along with them. You know, all human beings prefer to get along. We are hardwired to cooperate. And you will see the cortisol levels, the natural empathy that infants in incubators in a hospital when another infant newborn cries will create stress in another. We're meant to get along, and kids will do that. They're wired to do that. And the best way is for them to see the benefits of getting along, which means eroding the secondary gain, which is this feeling of getting higher status in their parents' eyes, which is, you know, again, why we need to step out. But kids, when you learn conflict and you learn a little rough and tumble, we've seen this in animal studies that if you separate rat siblings, they do far less well when they don't have the rough and tumble years. And so I think it's the same in human relationships too. Oh, my little computer slept there. You know, this is how we learn how to be good spouses. Having a sister teaches you how to have a female partner in your life, you know. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned if we let kids, you know, organically spend time together figuring those lessons out themselves. It's not textbook learning.
Now, on that point, I guess when we're talking about sibling rivalry, one of the dimensions that really makes things interesting is if you're talking about, you know, when you're talking about gender. So sisters, girls versus girls, boys versus girls, girls versus boys. What would you say are some of the key points to keep in mind when you're talking about sibling rivalry and from a parenting perspective?
Well, so the first thing to know is that no matter what I answer, I don't want parents coming to me saying, should I have a boy or a girl next? And how far apart should they be? Like, you know, you can't organize your life this way. You know, sort. Let it happen. But having said that, there are some theory pieces to keep in mind in terms of understanding that psychologically, children want to find and need to find their own ecological niche in the family where they can have their own identity and be separate from their siblings. They do not want to be compared, and they do not want to compete with one another. So the things that create competition and comparison is closeness in age and being of the same gender. So it's kind of like you can compare an apple to an apple, but you don't really compare an apple to a banana. So imagine if you have two sisters and they're 16 months apart, and the one sister is already doing really well at figure skating. The other sister might think, well, you know, boy, she's a girl and she's doing all that good figure skating. She's only 16 months older. But if it's a boy and he's 5 years older, you think, well, of course he can do all that. He's more physical. He's older. He's supposed to. So the closer in age, and if you're of the same gender, it creates a sense in the children of higher comparison, which means the kids will work harder to differentiate themselves. And so you're more likely to see the biggest difference in those kids in your family. And so I tell parents that it's one of our jobs from a parenting, takeaway on this. Don't compare your kids. Don't say, well, look at how clean his room is. Well, why can't you keep your room clean? Or, we don't want to compare kids. We don't want to set them up for competition. How many times do parents do this? First one to the car, and I know it makes them go faster and we're late for school, but you are setting up an animosity there. Mm-hmm. I try as much as possible to not use the other sibling as a reference. So if he says, well, Mom, he's got more pancakes than me, that's not fair. I said, it doesn't matter how many pancakes your brother has. Have you got enough in your tummy for you? If you are hungry and you need more pancakes, we will get you more pancakes. It does not matter what he has. And so we have to get rid of this notion of fairness, because it creates a feeling of competition where kids just learn to be bean counters, where they're always trying to keep everything equal. So it's a false notion, this idea of fairness. It's actually a competitive notion. It just means that nobody's net ahead, but it still means they're in competition neck and neck every minute of every day, and it's tiring.
It is, and especially in the ultra-competitive world that we live in. Now, Alyson, we've only scratched the surface of this whole topic of sibling rivalry, but it is the focus of an upcoming documentary in which you are involved. Can you tell us a bit about that? Yes,
so the CBC Doc Zone has a documentary, and it's called Sibling Rivalry, Near, Dear, and Dangerous. And so not only am I interviewed as one as the expert, so is Jeff Kluger, who writes for the New York Times. He's got a book called The Sibling Effect, and it follows some very high-profile cases of sibling rivalry, including who I didn't know. Do you know that Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine are sisters?
No, I didn't.
Who knew? I mean, you want to talk, huge rivals. Canada's hockey, the Stahl brothers, all of them went into hockey. Some interesting stuff there. The McCain's brother of potato fame. Anyways, it follows their stories, and we talk about what has led to some fractures in the relationship, and some of those turned out badly. Some of those stories reconciled later in life, and there's some great parenting tips. So that airs September 6th on Doc Zone, 9 p.m. So people can catch that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alyson.
Thank you. Happy parenting. Hope it helps.